Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I'm looking at the 2026 United States Governor's Elections map, and I'm doing my update for the beginning of the month of June. Now there are a lot of governor's races that are up, 36 in total. Without those governor's races factored in, Democrats currently hold 6, Republicans hold 8, so an overall advantage of 2 governor's races in the advantage of the Republicans when you account for the off-year elections like we just saw in 2025 and 2023 before that. So in this video, I'm going to break through every single governor's race in the United States. I have updated my ranking system or my rating system since the last monthly prediction. I have now cut off the tilt feature. So now everything that is 5 points and under is going to be a lead ranking for the Democrats and the Republicans on the map. That's one big feature for this. So with that said, there are 36 races that are currently across the country. I'm going to go through the states that I currently view as safe, and I'm going to do them a little bit quicker because it's going to take a very long time to go through all these races, and there's a lot of toss-up ones that I want to get to that are very, very important. So first things first, I'm going to start with the state of Hawaii and put that in the safe Democratic category. Not really too much of a surprise, but Hawaii goes as safe Democrat. The Republicans are going to win Idaho and Wyoming by a safe ranking as well. California and Oregon, I think California for sure is going to be a safe Democratic win. As of the time recording this video, I do not yet know who the winner of the primary is going to be. I believe it's either going to be Xavier Becerra or Tom Steyer. It's possible both of them will advance to the runoff, but if it is Steve Hilton versus one of the two, I feel very comfortable putting it as safe for the Democrats. Oregon, I am going to come back to. Colorado, this is an open race. The current Democratic governor, Jared Polis, is term limited, but it looks like U.S. Senator, I believe it is Michael Bennet, is running in this race. He'll end up likely being the Democratic candidate, and he'll end up being the governor and end up winning the state of Colorado by over 15 points in this election environment, which before I get any further, I just want to show you the updated polling numbers here. President Trump is currently sitting roughly about 20 points negative in his approval rating, and Democrats are also polling roughly about 8 points in the advantage on the generic ballot. So this is setting up to be a midterm election similar to 2018, where the Democrats are in for a very strong night and the Republicans are in for a potentially very disappointing night. Next, we're going to go to the neighboring states of South Dakota. There's a very fierce primary underway in the state of South Dakota on the Republican side. Again, as of the time I'm recording this video, you probably know the results of this by now, but as terms for the general election, South Dakota should go as safe for the Republicans. Next, the state of Oklahoma, which also has a very fierce primary underway for the Republicans as well. This is also going to go in as safe Republican, though. Arkansas, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, she should win this race without really any problem. That should be a safe Republican win. The state of Tennessee, Marsha Blackburn, I expect will end up being the Republican nominee for governor, and I think she'll win this race by more than 15 points. The state of Alabama, we do know is going to be a rematch election of Tommy Tuberville versus Doug Jones in the general election. And yes, while I do think this is a stronger election environment for the Democrats, I don't think a state like Alabama is going to fall under 15 points in this matchup of Tuberville versus Jones. I think we see Alabama governor's race go by more than 15 points and safe for the Republicans. J.B. Pritzker in the state of Illinois in a very heavily Democratic election environment. I think Pritzker will win re-election by over 15 points in the state of Illinois. Pennsylvania is going to be interesting, right between being a likely and safe Democratic state. It really depends because Stacey Garrity in all regards is a better overperformer candidate for the Republicans than Doug Mastriano is, but this is a stronger election environment and Josh Shapiro is a very strong Democratic incumbent governor. We're going to put Pennsylvania for now in the safe Democratic category. The state of Maryland with Democratic Governor Wes Moore. He is also very popular, though Maryland is much more of a solid Democratic state than Pennsylvania is. Wes Moore should win re-election as well, very handily without too much of a problem there. In the state of New York, Kathy Hochul versus the Republican Bruce Blakeman. This was a very competitive race in 2022 where it was Lee Zeldin versus Kathy Hochul. It was under, I believe it was 7 points. When everything is said and done, Kathy Hochul still doesn't hold the strongest approval ratings, but in an election environment where President Trump is currently down 20 points, probably going to end up seeing New York go by over 15 points for Kathy Hochul. The state of Connecticut, Ned Lamont versus, I believe, is Ryan Fazio will be the matchup for the general election. Connecticut has been prone to having some competitive elections in the past, but I do think in this election environment, Ned Lamont should probably win Connecticut and win it by a pretty solid amount. The state of Rhode Island also has an interesting governor's race, as Helena Foulkes is primary challenging the current governor of the state of Rhode Island in Dan McKee. That primary still has to sort itself out, but whether it's Foulkes or McKee in the general election, this should be a safe win for the Democrats. The state of Massachusetts as well should be a safe win for Democrat Maura Healey. She'll be facing off against either Mike Minogue or Brian Shortsleeve in the general election, and Maura Healey will likely win by more than 15 points once all the votes are in. We just got some news out of the state of Vermont that Phil Scott, the incumbent Republican governor, who wins by massive amounts in every election that he runs, is running for another 2-year term as governor of the state of Vermont. And he is going to win re-election by over 15 points, as he pretty much does in every single election. Yes, you may say he's a Republican in Vermont in a more blue election environment, but he is a Democrat that is typically considered a very liberal Republican, or he's a Republican that's a very liberal Republican, and one that a lot of Democrats end up voting for in the state. He should win re-election without any problems there. So with that, I think that's about all these safe states on the map, but it ends up with a very even amount. 16 Democratic-held governor seats, 16 held Republican governor seats, with now 18 seats remaining to talk about on the 2026 governor's map. Next, I'm going to go through the states that I currently have as likely, whether it be, I think I am missing one, and that is the governor's race in the state of Minnesota, where this is Amy Klobuchar running to succeed Tim Walz. We don't know who the Republican's going to be, whether it'll be Mike Lindell, Lisa DeMuth, or one of the other Republican candidates running, but given her track record of winning Senate races by over 15 points, we can definitely put Minnesota as safe for the Democrats as well. Okay, so with that, Democrats are at 17, Republicans are at 16, 17 toss-up seats. Now we can go to the likely states, and we're going to start with the state of Oregon. Oregon Democrat Governor Tina Kotek will be facing off against Christine Drazan in a rematch of the 2022 governor's race, and it's currently listed in between solid or likely Democratic. A recent Republican poll did show it as a tied race. Now, you may remember this race in 2022 was very close, very competitive, only a 3.4% win for Kotek over Drazan, but an independent candidate did get 8.6% of the vote, certainly splitting a lot of that vote away from Tina Kotek. I do think Kotek will end up winning this race rather handily, but without an independent candidate to split the vote, I don't know if Kotek can break 15% of the vote, or if it could fall under 5% as well in similar circumstances. So Oregon, I would start out as a likely Democratic state for Democratic Governor Tina Kotek. Next, we're going to go to the state of New Mexico. New Mexico is going to be an open race between Sam Bregman and Deb Haaland. The current governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, is term limited. The primary is taking place on June 2nd. So again, you will know the winner of this primary as the time we're recording this. I don't currently know the winner yet. I do believe Deb Haaland is favored, and I expect her to be the winner, but I do not know 100% for sure. The Republican side, same thing, though I'm very confident Greg Hull will probably end up winning that primary. As for the general, no polling data, but it's listed as likely for the Democrats. Given how it voted in 2022, with Michelle Lujan Grisham winning by 6.4%, I think we can expect at the bare minimum for the Democrats to win New Mexico by 5 points, and I'd probably win, honestly, closer above 10 points in the double digits as well, and put New Mexico as likely for the Democrats. Next, we're going to go to the state of Nebraska, Nebraska is an interesting governor's race because Nebraska is typically a very Republican state, even though there is a competitive Senate race happening here with Dan Osborne versus Pete Ricketts. The governor's race also could potentially be competitive. Jim Pillen, the incumbent governor, is running for re-election against Democrat Lynn Walz. As for the general, it's listed by solid Republican by most, though the Democratic polls that we've gotten, especially from Lake Research Partners, a pollster that's sponsored by Walz's campaign, shows it a 2-point race, and with still 5% of the vote undecided. Now, Nebraska, it voted for the Republican by 23 points in 2022, so that is a safe Republican ranking, but on top of the Senate race being competitive and the more Democratic-friendly national environment, I do think it falls a hair under 15 points, around like 13.5% to 14%, putting Nebraska as a likely Republican race. So it's not one that I think the Democrats are going to win and the Republicans are necessarily in fear of losing, but I think it's a governor's race that's going to be more competitive than perhaps you may otherwise be accustomed to it being. Next, I'm going to also put in the state of Texas. Texas, you'll probably heard of this race. This is the Republican Governor Greg Abbott. He is facing Democratic candidate Gina Hinojosa in the general election. Similar to Nebraska, solid Republican from most of the rankings here, but the polling data shows a more competitive race. Abbott versus Hinojosa in the Texas Public Opinion Research poll from the end of May shows it a 5-point lead, 4-point lead for Abbott in the public policy polling, which is also sponsoring James Talarico's campaign. Texas is known for being a pretty reliable state. It voted for Abbott about 11 points in 2022, but in a stronger election environment for the Democrats, I think we could see Abbott fall under that 10-point margin, certainly not exceed 15, but I don't think it's going to fall under 5 either. The Senate race, I think, will be under 5 points. The governor's race, I don't think so. I think Greg Abbott will win this race by a likely Republican rating. Next, we can go to the state of Florida. Florida, this is going to be the Republican incumbent governor Ron DeSantis. He is term limited, so it is an open race. And Byron Donalds appears to be the most likely Republican candidate to win the primary. He has a very large lead over the primary. The Democrats, David Jolly, the former Republican representative, is the most likely Democratic candidate to advance to the general. There are two independents, running in Mallory Demenci and Jason Pizzo. As for the general election, also solid Republican for most of the rankings, though Donalds versus David Jolly has shown there has been some close polls, including from Change Research from the middle of May, which is a Democratic-affiliated pollster. But given how Florida has voted in recent elections, including electing Ron DeSantis by about 19 points in 2022 and President Trump's 13-point win in 2024, I even think with a little bit of Republican Party fatigue at the top of the governor's mansion and winning here, I still think Byron Donalds will win, but I think he may win closer to around that 10 to 9-point margin in Florida. So I think it falls under 15 points and would be a likely Republican win. Though again, another state I expect Republicans will hold on to. Next, I have the state of South Carolina. South Carolina is also typically more of a solid Republican state, but in this election, there's a very competitive Republican primary underway, which will be taking place on June 9th. So by the time this video is out, this may be happening in just a few days. President Trump has officially weighed in and endorsed Lieutenant Governor Pamela Evette, so I do expect she'll ultimately be the Republican candidate, though there may be a runoff election if no candidate breaks 50% of the vote. But I do think Evette, after that runoff, if there is one, will ultimately win. On the Democratic side, Jermaine Johnson is the most notable Democratic candidate. For the general election, solid Republican or likely Republican, according to the prediction rankings. It voted for McMaster by 17.4% in 2022 after voting for Donald Trump won it by 17.9% in 2024. So very similar numbers, but I do think given Trump's approval ratings and the election environment, I think it moves a little bit in the direction of the Democrats falling under that 15-point margin, though not enough to put this into like a competitive race. Still think the Republicans win it relatively handedly, but I think we see it go likely for the GOP. Next, we're going to move to the state of New Hampshire, where New Hampshire is a state that would typically be more Democratic friendly, for instance, at the Senate level and the House level. But at the governor level, the current governor is Republican Kelly Ayotte, who won her first term in 2024 against the Democrat Joyce Craig. She is facing the runner-up from 2024 on the Democratic side in Cindy Warmington in the general election. And this race is fluctuating between likely Republican and solid Republican for most of the rankings. The most recent poll for Ayotte versus Warmington from UNH showed it a 8-point lead for Ayotte. The St. Anselm poll showed it a 7-point lead for Ayotte over Warmington. Again, more Democratic-friendly election environment is certainly going to hurt a lot of Republicans across the nation. It may hurt Ayotte a little bit as well, especially given New Hampshire is typically viewed as more of a toss-up state that does skew towards the Democrats, but Kristen Sununu won in 2022 by 15 points. 2024, Ayotte wins by 9.3. I still think we see Ayotte win by a minimum of 5 points, so I would put New Hampshire in likely Republican, though I think it's more likely she wins around 7 to maybe even 8 points than 5, but New Hampshire I would put as likely for the Republicans. The next state that I have going as likely is the neighboring state of Maine. Maine Democratic Governor Janet Mills is term limited, so is an open race. and there are competitive primaries on both the Democratic and Republican side. Democrats have Sheena Bellows, Troy Jackson, Angus King III, Hannah Pingree, and Nirav Shah running in this race. It's a competitive primary with a lot of undecided vote left out there. The most recent poll from the University of New Hampshire, which came out just a few weeks ago now, 2 weeks ago from the time you're seeing this video, shows Troy Jackson and Nirav Shah tied at 28-28 in the primary with 11% undecided. So if that poll is the start of something, impact research from the middle of May as well, towards the end of May as well, showed it 24% for Jackson, 32% for Nirav Shah. So if that's the start of something, of Jackson and Shah as the two leading candidates to be the Democrats, it's going to be a tight race between them to see who ultimately emerges as the Democratic candidate. On the Republican side, there is also a competitive primary underway, though in that same University of New Hampshire poll and the Pan Atlantic Research poll from before that, Robert Charles is the leading candidate at 37%. Next closest candidate is a member of the Bush family and Jonathan Bush. I believe he is the cousin of the former President George W. Bush. Jonathan Bush at 18% in second place. With 9% undecided, it's possible some candidates drop out and coalesce support around Jonathan Bush. He may be able to win this primary, but right now, Robert Charles appears to be the likely Republican candidate. As for the general, it's listed by likely Democratic from 2 rankings, lean Democratic to tilt from 2 rankings as well. Main votes at the governor level in 2022, Janet Mills won it by 13 points. So based on that result against Paula Page, it's almost bordering on being a safe state. Maine does have a little bit of a historical trend to break here, though, as Maine has never reelected or elected a party as governor 3 terms in a row. And Janet Mills won 2018, 2022. So I think this race is going to be competitive as Maine is a little bit of a wonkier state at the governor level than, say, maybe at the presidential level. But still, the midterm environment alone should guarantee the Democrats should win the state of Maine. I do think it stays under 15 points by a little bit. I think around an 11 to 12 point win for the Democratic candidate would put Maine as likely Democratic. Okay, so with all the likely states now out of the way, we have 9 governor's races remaining that I currently have as toss-ups, meaning I have them all finishing by 5% or under and can conceivably see a way that both parties could potentially win these governor's races. The first one I'm going to start with is the state of Alaska, because Alaska's governor's race is really a wild card one to keep an eye out for. The current Republican Mike Dunleavy is term limited, and the way Alaska works is there will be a primary election on, I believe it is August 18th, and the top 4 candidate vote getters will advance to the general election. Now, the Republicans have a lot of candidates running. Click Bishop, Dave Bronson, Adam Crum, Nancy Dahlstrom, the current lieutenant governor, Edna DeVries, Shelley Hughes, Matt Halala, Hank Kroll, James Parkin, Treg Taylor, Bruce Walden, and Bernadette Wilson all are running in this race. On the Democratic side, there are 3 candidates running in Tom Begich, Matt Clayman, and Jonathan Kreese-Tompkins, with Tom Begich consolidating most of this support. Now, as for the primary election right now, Tom Begich has been the leading Democratic candidate and leading Democratic candidate by a lot. The other Republican candidates are all splitting the vote relatively equally in the most recent polls, roughly around 6 to 7%. Yeah, I know I said 6 to 7% in these polls, but still a lot of undecided vote left at 35%. So no matter how this shakes out, we're going to have a lot of candidates advance to the final 4, and likely ranked choice voting is definitely going to be needed to decide this race in the general. As for the general, though, it's still listed as either likely to solid Republican, with the only poll from the general election showing Tom Begich at 38%, Click Bishop at 8%, Dave Bronson at 13%, and Bernadette Wilson at 16% with 25% undecided. The reason I'm a little skeptical on the Alaska governor's race is the Senate race between Mary Peltola and Dan Sullivan is very close, and one that, looking at the current polls, Mary Peltola is actually favored to win. But I do think that the governor's race, even with Begich in the race, gives the Republicans a chance if they can coalesce around one candidate, though Tom Begich is certainly within striking distance of winning this race. For now, I would leave Alaska as lean for the Republicans, a very narrow win of likely under 5 points, but certainly one to keep an eye out for as a potential sleeper for the Democrats to maybe flip in 2026. So that is the state of Alaska. Next, we're going to move north here. We're going to go to the state, or north from the map. I know not geographically, but we're going to move north to the state of Nevada. Nevada is also very quickly becoming a very interesting governor's race because this is a Republican incumbent, Joe Lombardo, who won in 2022 against the Democratic Governor Steve Sisolak by 1.5%. He flipped this race. Now, Joe Lombardo is running for a second term. The elections for the primary are taking place on June 9th. Also, he'll be facing off against Nevada Attorney General and Aaron Ford. The general election is listed as very slightly in the Republican Joe Lombardo's favor, and the polling data is very tight. 41% for Lombardo, 39.5% for Aaron Ford, 19.5% undecided. It's such a wide open race for Lombardo versus Ford, one that Lombardo is currently winning, but it's not by a very drastic amount. The election environment would suggest that the Democrats are more likely to win this race than the Republicans, and yet Lombardo has an early lead in the polls. He is a relatively popular governor, though there is a lot of, I believe, it's unemployment issues going on in Las Vegas, which is the largest city in the state of Nevada. So even though Joe Lombardo is, I think, currently favored in this race, and I would have him leading right now by a little bit under 2 points in this governor's race right now, Nevada is certainly a state that I'm keeping an eye out for as a potential sleeper flip as well for the Democrats if things really go bad against the Republicans in November. Because Lombardo barely won in 2022, and this is certainly a state Democrats are eyeing to try and flip in 2026. In Nevada, I have as lean Republican for Joe Lombardo right now, but certainly an interesting one to keep an eye out for. Next in Nevada, we have the state of Arizona. Arizona, this is Democratic Governor Katie Hobbs, who won her race in 2022 against Kari Lake, winning by just 0.67%. I said 6-7 again, didn't I? Very close race. She is running for re-election. The Republicans, 2 U.S. representatives, and Andy Biggs and Dave Schweikert, are fighting out the primary, though Andy Biggs is very likely to win that primary and advance to the general. And the rankings on this one are split between toss-up and lean Democrat. Their current polling, though, right now, is not toss-up or lean Democrat. It is actually likely Democrat. Katie Hobbs at 44.4%, Andy Biggs at 38.4%, a 6-point lead with 17.2% of the vote. In terms of the matchups of Biggs versus Hobbs, there's still a ton of undecided vote here, but we have not seen a lead for Andy Biggs over Katie Hobbs in a poll since February of 2025. So at this current point in time, there's a ton of undecided vote. It's very possible Andy Biggs may ultimately prove this wrong and end up winning this race. But right now, I have to put Arizona as lean for Katie Hobbs. She has more of the support shored up. Also, one of the criticisms among some Republicans for 2022 was Katie Hobbs is very beatable. The Republicans put two more of an extreme Republican like Kari Lake up against her. Andy Biggs is arguably just as conservative, if not more conservative, than Kari Lake, which may not play too well in a midterm general election in the state of Arizona against the incumbent Democratic governor. So Arizona currently goes lean Democrat for Katie Hobbs. Next, we're going to go to the state of Kansas, where there is an update in this race since the last time I did a prediction on this race. This is incumbent Democratic Governor Laura Kelly. The Democratic primary is still Ethan Corson and Cindy Hochler are fighting out this primary. The endorsements, Ethan Corson has the endorsement of Laura Kelly, the current governor, so he is the preferred candidate among the Democratic brass that is in charge of the state. The Republican primary, there are several candidates that are running in this race, though it is very notable that Ty Masterson, the president of the Kansas Senate, has gotten the official endorsement of President Trump just a few days ago from the time I'm recording this, and the U.S. Senator Roger Marshall's endorsement as well. So like we've seen with the Texas Senate race and a lot of other races across the country, now that Trump has endorsed Ty Masterson, we're probably going to see a lot of that Republican support coalesce around Ty Masterson and him be the candidate for the general election. And then from there, no polling data yet, but it's currently listed as lean for the Republicans. And Kansas is interesting. It went for Laura Kelly by 2.2% in 2022. At the presidential level, though, it was a safe Republican state in 2024, 16.1%. But governor's races in Kansas are always closer than the presidential races and even the Senate races as well. Kelly won it by 5 points in 2018, and it went for the Republicans in 2014, Sam Brown back at the time, by only 3.7%. So Kansas always seems to be very competitive at the governor level. It's going to go, in my rankings, as a lean Republican, as a Republican flip, with the support of Ty Masterson and President Trump behind him. I think Republicans will flip this governor's race, but I think it stays under 5 points for now due to the competitive nature of having a Democratic candidate that is backed by the current governor and the midterm election environment and the approval rating of President Trump and the Republicans keeping this race competitive. Next, we're going to move to the state of Iowa, where this is arguably one of the most, if not the most, talked about governor's races in the country. This is Democratic candidate Rob Sand, who is currently the only statewide elected Democrat in the state of Iowa. He is running, by all accounts, a very strong campaign as a Democratic candidate in Iowa. The Republican primary is still TBD between Eddie Andrews, Randy Feenstra, Zach Lawn, and Brad Sherman. In terms of the endorsements in this race, President Trump has thrown his support behind Randy Feenstra, so he appears to be the likely Republican candidate to be the nominee, though a most recent poll from JMC Analytics does show Zach Lawn actually leading Randy Feenstra by 2 points, with still a lot of undecided vote. Though, as Trump's endorsed Feenstra, we've seen that has a very strong effect, and Feenstra will likely be the candidate. As for the general, though, the Predictions Cook Political Report has it toss-up. Inside Elections and Sabbath Crystal Ball have it lean Republican, but the 3 most recent polls, including one from April, shows Rob Sand leading over Randy Feenstra by, honestly, likely Democratic margins in 2 out of the 3 polls. So what does this ultimately mean? We're looking at a governor's race in Iowa that's going to be the closest that we've seen since 2018, where it ended up going for Kim Reynolds, the Republican, by 2.7%. Rob Sand is a very strong Democratic candidate. Governor's races are typically easier to flip than Senate races, where voters that are more locked into voting, say, only Democratic or only Republican for president or Senate. For some reason, governor's races always are a little bit more lenient, with voters willing to take a chance on the opposite party. Note, red Republican in Vermont, red Republican governor in New Hampshire, blue Democratic governor in Kansas. These things are more likely to potentially flip. Iowa is a state that at the Senate level, if you watch my prediction, I have it going Republican. At the governor level, by the thinnest of margins, even potentially under 1 point, I have Rob Sand narrowly winning this race, flipping it from red to blue, and what may end up being the shock of the night. Rob Sand, he's running a very strong campaign. He's consolidating a lot of support, and I think he's capitalizing off of a very strong anti-Republican election environment in 2026, and I think it's barely enough for Rob Sand to win this race against Randy Feenstra, who thus far, despite having President Trump's endorsement, has not performed very well in the early polls in this race. Though polling in Iowa is always very wonky, Iowa I currently have as lean for the Democrat. Next, we're going to move to the state of Wisconsin. Wisconsin, this is going to be Democratic Governor Tony Evers, who's not running for re-election. The Democrats have several candidates running. Sarah Rodriguez, Francesca Hong, and Mandela Barnes, I would say, are the most notable 3 as of right now. The most recent poll from Public Sentiment Institute, which does sponsored by Great Lakes Perspective, shows Barnes at 24%, Rodriguez at 12.3%, and Hong at 8.5%, with 38.8% undecided. Marquette University poll from March before that has Francesca Hong at 14%, Barnes at 11% in that poll. So we have to wait and see for this primary to play itself out before we know for sure. Though based on the most recent poll, the hot hand is Mandela Barnes to be the Democratic candidate. The Republican candidate we know will be U.S. Representative Tom Tiffany of the 7th District. As for the general, complete toss-up across the board for these rankings. Only 2 polls for Barnes versus Tiffany, and one's from a Republican pollster, one's from a Democratic pollster, and they show Mandela Barnes leading over Tom Tiffany by about 2 points in the Republican poll, and the Democratic poll shows Barnes leading over Tiffany by about 6 points. For Crawley versus Tiffany, it's about a 1-point lead. For Hong versus Tiffany, Tiffany's actually leading by about 3 points in this poll, and then 4 points in this one. Rodriguez versus Tiffany, it's about a 3-point lead for Rodriguez over Tiffany in that poll, including the leaners. As for Wisconsin, it voted in 2018 for Evers by 1.1 against the incumbent Scott Walker, 3.4% for Evers versus Tim Michaels in 2022. So as for this race, how it's currently looking, it's going to be very close. I think the candidate that it ends up being certainly matters. I think Francesca Hong being the Democratic candidate is certainly the farthest left candidate, gives the Republicans probably the best chance at winning this race. But again, in essentially a 50-50 state like Wisconsin, given the election environment and President Trump's current approvals, I do still think we see Wisconsin's governor's race go for the Democratic candidate by under 5 points. I think we see this one go about probably around that 3 to 3.5% margin once again in this race. And right now, I think it's Mandela Barnes versus Tom Tiffany. If, just for full transparency, if it was Francesca Hong versus Tom Tiffany, I think Tiffany would win this race by about 1 percentage point. But for this video, I'd put it as lean for the Democrats. Next, we're going to have the state of Michigan, where there's also been a big update in this video since the last time I did an update on this. In Michigan, we do know the independent candidate, Mike Duggan, the former Detroit mayor that was running in the race, has officially dropped out. So now it is a typical Democratic versus Republican 1v1 race between Jocelyn Benson, the Michigan Secretary of State, and likely going to be either John James or Perry Johnson. The current polling shows John James with a lead over the rest of the Republican field. I do not believe President Trump has made an endorsement in this race, so it could be interesting to see, does President Trump come in? The primary, I do believe, is scheduled to take place on August 4th, so it is still a good amount of time until that happens. President Trump may decide to endorse Johnson or James over one another, and that could certainly shake up which Republican ends up being the candidate. As for the rankings, it's listed as lean Democrat or tilt Democrat from one or from two of them, toss up from two of them as well. The prior polling before that, where it was Benson versus Cox versus Duggan, and then we also were looking for Benson versus James versus Duggan, it showed Benson leading over James and Duggan by about 5 points or so. Now, without Duggan in the race, what happens with about 21% of supporters that were supporting Mike Duggan is going to be a very crucial question for this general election. Michigan, at the presidential level and Senate level, has been very close. There's a very close Senate race underway as well. In terms of the governor level, I think it will ultimately be a matchup of Benson versus John James, and one where I think Benson wins by about 4 to 4.5%, just enough to be under 5 points, where Michigan goes lean for the Democrats in a very, very close election. 2 states remaining. We have the state of Ohio. Ohio is going to be interesting as well, as this is going to be Republican Vivek Ramaswamy. You may remember him for running for president in 2024, and Amy Acton, who's the former Ohio Department of Health during, obviously, 2020 and all that stuff that happened and all that fun stuff. This is a very interesting matchup of Ramaswamy versus Acton. The current polling shows a very close rankings that does favor Vivek Ramaswamy, but the polls have been tight. Ramaswamy leads across the 3 averages by only 1.7% at 47.5 for Vivek to 45.8, with still 6.7%. I said 6.7 again, 6.7% undecided. So this governor's race does seem more volatile, I would say, than the Senate race, where John Husted is already up around 49%. Ramaswamy is running about 1.5% below that. But Ramaswamy is leading in this race, and I do think, given how close these polls are, it's very possible they can go either way. The governor's race in 2022 was a 25-point win for Mike DeWine, but the 2018 governor's race, DeWine beat the Democratic candidate Cordray by only 3.7%. I ultimately think we see this governor's race sort of reflect the Senate race as well, where I do narrowly give it to Vivek Ramaswamy, but I think he wins by like a 3-point margin or under in this race. But I do think Vivek, as of today, holds on and wins this race, but not by a very comfortable margin for Republicans in the state of Ohio. We have one governor's race remaining on the map, and that is the state of Georgia. And since the last time we've done this video, we have a little bit more transparency on the race. Keisha Lance Bottoms won the Democratic primary, getting above 50% of the vote. She will be the Democratic candidate. On the Republican side, Republicans Rick Jackson and Burt Jones have advanced to a runoff. Now, this is interesting, as President Trump has thrown his support behind Burt Jones, but there's been 3 polls, and they show differing results. Jones wins the first one from Qantas Insights by 2 points, wins Insider Advantage's poll by 6 points, but then Rick Jackson leads JMC Analytics poll by 2. So this runoff is actually very, very competitive, and we're going to have to wait and see how this all plays out, as we don't have a real definitive answer here on who's going to win this runoff. That runoff election also, I do believe, is taking place. It doesn't say the date, I do believe, here on the Wikipedia page, but that should be coming up relatively quickly for when that runoff will take place. As for the general, it's pretty much toss-up across the board. Keisha Lance Bottoms is someone that's going to be running on the top of the ticket as well, but Jon Ossoff, the U.S. Senator that's up for re-election. And Ossoff is making a very strong commitment to Lance Bottoms to try and get both of them elected here. And there's only been one poll in these races from Echelon Insights. It shows Lance Bottoms at 49, Jackson and Jones at 43 each, with 8% undecided. It's Georgia. Georgia's going to be perennially close, going to be a very close toss-up state for a long time now. It voted for Brian Kemp over Stacey Abrams by 7.5% in 2022. 2018, we saw Kemp win by 1.4% in this race. It's going to be an incredibly, incredibly close race in the state of Georgia. This is honestly the toughest call I've had on this map of going lean Republican or lean Democrat in the state of Georgia. There's a lot of questions in the state. I think at the Senate race at the top of the ticket, Jon Ossoff will ultimately win. And I think he'll win by around 3.5% or so to maybe even 4%. The governor's race is going to be so tight between Burt Jones, Rick Jackson, and Keisha Lance Bottoms. It's really 50-50, tough decision here. Given the trends of the midterm election environment, I'm going very narrowly in the lean Democratic category, giving the Democrats the state of Georgia, and what would be a honestly colossal flip in a state that used to be a Republican stronghold has become a 50-50 toss-up state. Democrats winning Georgia would be very, very big. Lance Bottoms, being the former mayor of Atlanta, may help her get a lot of voter turnout out in Atlanta and the surrounding counties, Fulton County, Cobb County, DeKalb County, these very key areas for the Democrats. And I think just by the thinnest of margins, easily under 1 point in this ranking for me, I have the Democrats winning the Georgia governor's race. With that, I have the 2026 governor's map finishing at 25 for the Democrats, 25 for the Republicans, a 50-50% split across the governor's maps in the entire country, showing what a politically divided nation that we are. 25 for the Democrats, 25 for the Republicans. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please hit like and subscribe if you did. I post a new video every single day at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. If you want to watch more of my videos, please hit like and subscribe and do all that. For now, that is it. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in a future video.